Good.
Hey,
I think
hey,
we're back at it.
we're
Good to
live.
see you. Miho,
Live in
how you
full
doing?
effect. Yeah, all right, yeah.
Good,
Very well.
good.
You?
Yeah, getting over the bit sick, the flu and stuff. But apart from that, yeah, just yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. The usual sort of stuff. Good to see you anyway. We should probably crack on with things. Uh,
Good.
thought something slightly different this time. I know we spoke about this one already. I think you've probably seen it. I thought we'd try something slightly different this time because, our hometown, or both of our adoptive hometown, is kind of replete with knife crime in particular, and we've had a kind of theme of knife crime in the last few. And Nottingham does have always seems to have had a bit of a knife crime problem. It's always in the news. A few really terrible tragedies in over past years. But there was a video circulating on kind of Facebook and Instagram and stuff from an incident in Nottingham a couple of weeks ago. And quick warning to anyone viewing, it is pretty horrific, right? It's not the initial stages of a stabbing. It's towards the end of it. We watched a few stabbings already, so a quick trigger warning for the slightly nervous of our viewers about these things. But hey, that's what we're here to look at. We're here to learn from this kind of stuff, not just have fun, but certainly not have fun at kind of gratuitous violence, but to learn from it. And so there's not a lot technically to learn from this, I don't think. Right? But it's more about mindset. It's more about kind of understanding the problem, because I think we've spoken about a few times before. Getting your head around the problem is half the issue when you come to kind of Krav Maga or combatives training. People kind of have this general sense that they don't feel particularly safe, that there's kind of a problem sort of out there and so on, but that it doesn't really have much shape, and they tend to fill in the gaps with kind of sporting depictions of violence or Hollywood depictions of violence, or at the very least, the kind of gritty TV-based violence, which actually, it doesn't have, kind of real violence doesn't have much resemblance towards, and the kinds of the rules and well, the ethos that goes with those kind of sporting and whatever Hollywood-based violence, that no one really gets hurt, or that you can take 10,000 shots, or someone will stop when you kind of give up. And so this is an incident which I think occurred in sort of the Gedling area, Carlton area of the city, which is not too far from where we train. A lot of our members live there. One of our instructors lives there. And I don't really know the kind of the situation that led up to it. There's a lot of kind of gossip flying around, I guess, about what the situation was and who he was and so on. But as far as I understand, it was two individuals who were known to each other, about which some sort of argument or altercation had occurred. So I'll share it and then get your thoughts, unless you got anything before we kind of go to that.
Let's go. Yeah, straight in.
Okay, so can you see that?
Yeah.
You can. Good. It plays through a couple of times automatically, because I think obviously someone's recorded it on their phone. So here it goes.
Yo, what the fuck is going on? My man's getting soaked up. Yo, fam! Yo! Leave him, bro. Yo, what the fuck is going on? My man's getting soaked up. Yo, fam!
So that's it. That's the that 5
fam.
seconds of video, right? But close to home, Nottingham, on a Thursday night, I think it was, around 8:30 p.m., 9 o'clock, as far as I can.
I remember the news article, and it was a reasonable sort of hour on a reasonable day sort of thing.
Yeah, a friend of mine from another city, from Birmingham, just texted and said, "What the hell's going on in Nottingham?" Right? I've just seen it all over Facebook and Instagram or something. I have no idea. Looked and saw that video. But,
Yeah, grim. It's clearly the tail end of an incident. There's sort of marks on the ground, and some liquid on the ground, sort of in the forefront of that. So whether they've been at it already and he's taken a few. He's obviously, the guy on the ground isn't well. He's not wholly fighting back. There's not a lot of spirit.
He's just holy.
Yeah. Very sort of.
I mean, I understand he didn't die. He's not going to be in great shape, right? But
life-changing injuries, I'd heard. But
sure.
But he's not dead. And there was a real sort of like cold continuance of, the guy had clearly had enough and wasn't even protesting anymore, and it just kept going and just kept going. Just sort of for the sake of it, either that fixation, or really getting his point across to avoid a pun, but real continuation, despite any clear victor in that. Relentless.
Obviously, the horns and the shouting is enough to make him kind of look up and register that other people are watching, right? But he just doesn't give a fuck, right? He's at that point where he just doesn't give a fuck. He's stabbing someone in not broad daylight, but kind of early evening in the middle of the road with cars pulled up around him, right? Outside a garage, and I think there's a co-op next door and stuff like that. So a busy thoroughfare with cars and pedestrians, and he's taking the time to turn the guy over and stab him up some more. Like, the dude doesn't give a fuck, right? So this idea that it will only happen in secluded areas and people are reasonably fuck, dude's just nuts, right? It just doesn't give a fuck. He's not going to stop. He's not going to stop because he's working something out on this dude, right? And people say to me, oh yeah, these things are very rare and so on. Yeah, but there are people out there like that, right? They just don't give a fuck. They won't obey any. They don't care about in that moment. They don't care about the consequences. They don't give a shit about the consequences. And if you had that moment realizing, oh, what am I doing? And you run off. Okay, but no, he just didn't give a shit what other people are seeing or videoing or anything like that. He's going to do what he wants to do. So this idea that there's this kind of reasonable level of force that some kind of sociopath will inflict upon you and then stop. No, the guy's going to keep on going until he's satisfied that he's done what he's done. Those are the kinds of people that are out there, right? And I think one of the important lessons that I wanted to sort of draw from this, we talk about kind of the sociopathic, we talk about the kinds of things that people do, but there's always I fear that sort of kind of slight disbelief that there are that kind of person out there. But no, the monsters walk amongst us, right? And that's what we're dealing with.
I've filled up with fuel there. I've driven down that road. I mean, this is not some part of town where you sort of wind your windows up and drive through quickly. No. It's a bit of a sort of it's a bit of an estate, and the certain demographics and that, but it's not some sort of crime-ridden hotspot. It's not unreasonable to pass through there any time of the day, Anna.
No. And so they're out in plain sight. They walk amongst us. They behave like that. That's what we're up against, right? That's the kind of the enemy, if you want to use that kind of terminology, that we're preparing for. We're training people to have some chance of dealing with, right? Not kind of a argument over bump shopping trolley in Morrison's supermarket, right? It's that kind of predator that just won't stop, right? And we get a lot of kind of comments, just generally, I suppose, within the combatives world or within Krav Maga about how extreme it is and so on. Well, actually, compared with that, it's not extreme, right? Like, if that's what you're facing, what we do is not extreme. That's why what we do is for extreme circumstances like that, as well as all the other stuff that we talk about, having fun while training, the camaraderie, the community, and all of that from kind of regular training, not just your short course. That's the kind of the end point.
And okay, we're getting the tail end of it, and you can see sort of already Victorious, he's sort of dominated in what he wants to do with that, but at some point there will have been an opportunity to do something, And then you start to think about the value of 360 counter against somebody who is clearly driven enough to gone through whatever he's done and then carry on even when you're not fighting back. I'm not sure, chinning him and kicking him in the groin and running off is going to do anything other than give you a bit of distance whilst he chases after you. You got to have other options.
Who knows what went beforehand, but that's not going to be a situation. I think what you're saying is not going to be a situation that's solved by a couple of tricks or quick techniques, right? And again, I think we've spoken about this before. People come in search of a couple of moves, and you hope that those moves will somehow keep you safe against that, right? Against that, and actually the answer to that is no, it won't. Right, there's not much.
Buy you a moment.
There's not much unless you're, and against that, then regular training, resilience, all that kind of stuff. That is what gives you a chance, not learning a few tricks and so on. And sometimes I get a little bit. I'm a big fan of kind of short self-defense courses and so on. They give you stuff for people that don't want to spend their lifetime training and sacrificing their body on the altar of combatives. But you got to be realistic about what 4 weeks at your local leisure centre buys you, or even a great 8-week combatives course. What does it buy you? Well, it buys you a few tricks, what Fairbairn called the tricks, but it doesn't buy you the underlying kind of 90% of the iceberg or whatever it is. That takes regular training. That's not for everyone, right? But you'll have to understand that therefore you're not going to get something to deal with that. When another tragic one, I don't want to make capital out of it at all, but the 2 university students who were murdered in the early hours of the morning a couple of years ago, and you saw the size of the guy with the machete that killed them and the other older chap, the school caretaker. And then there were calls, like students should have self-defense lessons, and so great, they should, that would be great. But then I look at the kind of the size of the average 18, 19-year-old student and their mental attitude and robustness, and think, well, unless you're the kind of the rugby playing cauliflower ear prop forward at 21, you stand, even with 8 weeks of self-defense training, mentally, physically, you stand no chance against that guy.
And you add in a bit of psychosis. You add in something that is driving them more than sociopathy, like you say, or psychosis in the moment, and
probably self-medicating on other things other than the medication they're supposed to take, which is going to inure them. Not to sort of claim some sort of superhuman attributes, but I think we would struggle, right? Even in our prime, you would struggle. It would be a crapshoot whether you survived that incident with a psychotic 22-stone guy with a machete who's determined to chop you into shish kebab. He's any well-trained person would really struggle to survive. So the chances of someone with a short course surviving is kind of, I think, minimal and fairy dust. But the point of it was to kind of think through that's what's out there, right? That's one of the things that should kind of fill out some of that reality gap in terms of who the possibilities are, who you might face.
It's difficult. Good to see.
And other people say to me stuff like, you teach people to hit people first. Well, it's like, well, no, you shouldn't do that. That's really bad. You should, this is kind of a situation, a lifelong kind of gripe that any combatives instructor will kind of face at some point. Oh no, I couldn't. You shouldn't teach people to hit others first. It's like, well, why not? Well, no, because the first one is, well, that's illegal. Well, no, it's not. Right? The law makes provision for that. Whether whether you can pass that off effectively is a separate matter. But the law does make provision. British law makes provision. Most jurisdictions make provision for preemptively striking someone when various criteria about the level of threat that you face or you feel you face is met. Your response has to be proportionate. It has to be reasonable. But you are entitled to strike first. You don't have to wait to be stabbed. right, in order to defend yourself, right? You know, is it really you want me to wait for him to try to stab me in the neck before I hit him first? No, or hit him first. Well, you get people into lots of trouble by getting them to hit first.
Yeah.
Well, no, right? Like, really, you think that the requirement would be that he has to stab me before, or he has to, at least make a really good attempt at stabbing me, even if I manage to stop him.
Yeah.
Before, remember, he's going to be going like a sewing machine. He's not going to be going once or twice. He's going to be hacking away at me. You really think I have to let him begin that process before I hit him first? Like, no, right? We know, that the one who goes first with sufficient power, right? Enough juice, as Lee Morrison would say, enough juice. The one who goes first with enough juice is the one that in 99% of cases prevails. So it's either going to be, it's asymmetrical. It's either going to be him or you. Who's going to go first? Yeah, of course I'm going to teach. Of course I'm going to teach you to go first. Well, what if it wasn't a knife, right? Well, how do I know it's not? So how do I know, right? He might start to punch me and he knocks me out. He might start to punch me and I start to defend myself, and then he pulls out a knife and stabs me to death because I'm defending myself fairly effectively. In other words, I'm not getting hit as much as he initially intended. Right? How do I know? I don't know that in the moment. That's why we have those criteria about whether you fear for yourself. Oh, it's a grey area. That's the next thing you go. It's a grey area. Well, actually, no, it's not. Right? It's like, don't be a dick. Right? If you're a dick, if you look to be confrontational with people, then what we do isn't for you.
Yeah.
Right? If your life is one filled with confrontation and argument and being a dick and winding people up because you feel some sort of righteous sense of indignation, then what we do is not for you, because you are going to find yourself in confrontations and you're not going to know whether you should be going first or second or so on.
Yeah.
In which case you need to have a chat with yourself, right? But if you're sort of person who really doesn't want to be in any kind of violent situation because you realize that that's not a good way of solving problems and it brings serious consequences that change your life, right? It's not a fun thing. It's not a game. If you realize that and you're not a dick and you don't wind people up and you don't provoke them, right? You don't argue with people unnecessarily, then it's not such a sort of grey area when you really are genuinely scared for your own physical safety. Right? It's just like, it's like there's nothing here that I did to provoke this, and I'm trying to extract myself from it. And he's not having it, and he's going to hurt me. He's going to hurt me badly if I allow him to continue down this path. Right? It's not such a grey area after all. It becomes a grey area when you start to realize that your own behavior contributes to the situation.
That's time for some inward reflection, isn't it? But I mean,
we're all dicks at times, but it's like live some sort of Buddhist Zen master or something. But we all need to have a chat with ourselves at times, and other things trigger it, like driving and stuff. But if you're asking that question about, well, I'm never quite sure when I should do it, then it's probably your own behavior that's making you wonder that.
Yeah. I mean, and we've mentioned a couple of times now, and sort of really trying to drive home that having some stand-up kicking and punching skill sets, and you're willing to actually wade in first, or just keep going when it goes, is key. But if we look back, to ask you a couple of things, if we look back at the vital pyramid, and the very base of that, you've got a mindset. Everything else is built on that basis. But when you've got short courses, when you've got limited exposure, when you're only training once a week, and you're coming from an environment where, and I think we're moving towards generations of kids who didn't grow up getting punch-ups in the playground. I don't say that because I look back at, with rose-tinted sort of black-eyed underneath spectacles. But, look at my son who's 17 and all his friends. It's not that they don't ever get in any trouble and have never been in any. But there's not weekly punch-up reports from him of things going on. I used to get in the mix all the time. Smaller scrapes at school, a scrap in the playground, someone's hunting for you as you come off the bus. And,
And people will get punched just as a matter of course,
you
right?
know,
Again, not to glorify it,
oh,
but it didn't necessarily have to be a fight, right? It wasn't like form a square and you go. I remember being punched on many occasions, like during a game of football in the playground, or just like running and someone would just punch you and for no particular reason, or you had irritated someone in class and they would punch you, and nothing came of it, right? It was like, but we would, I mean, I think there is that sort of slight change in sort of interpersonal attitudes. Again, maybe it's better that there's not that now, right? But it does when it comes to the point when it comes to dealing with violence, not having had that is in that instance a detriment, perhaps.
For sure. And then there's that sort of duty of care as an instructor for you not to be just teaching tricks and hoping for the best for them, but of actually trying to develop a combative mindset, which it's really hard when you're in an environment where, as stressed as you might make them, they're not in real danger. How do you approach making them feel like they are genuinely under threat? And I think we do things that really does that, especially on the some of the weekend specialist stuff that we do, and you get them and you really get an opportunity to drag a pillowcase over their head and batter them in a corridor before letting them out, and people suddenly start to shit it whether it's real or not, because it's tough. But taking that into everyday classes and having people who are willing to train in that manner for any period of time is a consideration as a good instructor.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I've been down one route with that, because that was a serious concern for me. When it comes to the moment, will I crap myself and freeze up, right? And so I spent a lot of time sort of trying to work out how not to do that. Working on the doors, that was my kind of first, nightclub doors. That's my first kind of foray into throwing myself into that adrenaline-filled environment to test myself and to make sure that I could. And once you've done it once and you didn't freeze up, you think, oh, it's going to be easier the next time. And actually, it's probably not. And I always had that fear. And when it came to the training, I always had that fear as well. And so I've been down one particular path, which was one that fits with that vital pyramid, which is kind of the mindset thing, which is, we're going to take the physical stuff and so on, and then we're going to isolate this thing called mindset and kind of address that almost independently of these other things. And perhaps the biggest kind of step down that route for me was the fast defense stuff, the fear and adrenal stress training stuff with Bill Kipp, Dick Chance, Peyton Quinn, all those kinds of people that I learnt from and got the technology from and participated in for many years. I know you've been part of it for a long time as well. And I thought that I think that the trigger point for fear and adrenal stress training is the right one. And Peyton Quinn said this years ago. He said, all your physical skills are not worth anything in a real fight if under those adrenaline circumstances you cannot, because of the paralyzing effect of adrenaline, access your physical tool set. So you've got to address the kind of fight, flight, and freeze in particular response, and you've got to bring people to that. You've got to adrenalize them, and then the methodology was, so let's adrenalize people and make them work in that environment. Just like going and working on the doors is, you're going to be adrenalized all night. At some point you might have to do that. You might have to do what you are fearing. And so that's the fast technology, right? You get a bunch of students, you put them in a room with each other so that they're one performs at a time, and then it's the next one, and so they've got eyes on them as well. There's a predator and a bullet man suit or a predator armor suit, and there's lots of woofing, lots of kind of verbal dialogue, and you adrenalize them. And then in the latter scenarios they have to fight back and do all that kind of stuff, and so that kind of asymmetrical environmental scenario based training is one way of eliciting that adrenal dump and then making people do the performance of that. And for many years I thought that was brilliant. And I think it is in many respects. I think, if you want people to fear adrenaline of conflict and then to work through it with encouragement and direction and so on, it's great. Everyone should do that. And I think we've had a lot of real successes of people who aren't necessarily combatively minded, You know, going through that process, coming out the other side, having a sense of confidence and a less fear that they would freeze up, that they would at least be able to do something back, and so on. I think that's a really valuable lesson. I think now, you know, kind of things have moved on a little bit. There are other ways of doing that. I think now things have moved on a little bit, certainly in my thinking. And I kind of come full circle to where I started, I think, a little bit. I think you have to do some of that, but I don't think it's necessarily the biggest or the only thing. I mean, how to express it? Yeah, when you're out in the middle of the room with 20 other people watching you and a predator, yeah, you're adrenalized, right? Some of that's like stage fright, though, right?
For
You know,
sure.
people are watching you. You know, you got
Yeah,
stage fright, right?
performance anxiety. For
And
sure.
and then you perform. It's great, right? But is that the same kind of context dependent stuff that you're going to get in a real fight? You know, the fact that you're really adrenalized but you manage to function, is that the same kind of thing? Does it transfer in that way? Does the brain really not know any difference between that and reality? You know, here's a slight different analogy. I don't want to jump out of a plane, right? Not even with a parachute, right? I just don't like heights. The thing, just the thought of it starts to make me go into a slightly cold sweat, right? So one of the biggest kind of fears I have, and it's something I will never address because I don't need to, right? I won't do it. But if I jumped out of a plane and I conquered that adrenaline, right? Imagine, yeah, okay, Dave, you've got to step to the edge now. You know, I go through that build up for days and days and days. Step to the edge of the plane. Gonna, you know, kind of summon up the courage. My heart rate's gonna be around 200 beats a minute or whatever it is. I'm gonna try and keep myself calm. I'm gonna take that one step off, and I know it will all be all right. Chances are it will all be all right. Once I've done that, will I be any better at dealing with a violent thug down the road? Will I be able to control but the fact that I've controlled myself and performed like that, will I be able, well, in a sense, I'll at least know what adrenaline is, and but I'll still feel adrenaline, and my higher brain won't be processing much, and I will still feel adrenaline, and maybe there's a higher chance that I will do something physical, but it doesn't seem to me to, and I think some of the empirical evidence shows that it is context dependent in this way. It doesn't seem to track, you know, perfectly across these things, right? Some things that don't adrenalize me might well adrenalize you. You know, I taught a seminar in Greece, or, you know, probably 10 years ago now, and it was the biggest seminar they'd ever held for the association, and I think about 400 people turned up, and it was packed, and it's like, oh, this is amazing. I taught this amazing seminar. And people said, weren't you terrified? I said, no, not at all. And they're like, how can, you know, I would have been, you know, crap. I teach 8 people in the room, and you're teaching 400, and you're shouting, and you've got them all arranged in this way. I said, yeah, but I teach 400 people 2 days a week.
Yeah.
Right? Because my job requires me to stand up and talk to 200 to 400 people 2 days a week. And I've done that before I got there, I'd done that for 17, 18, 20 years. So by the time I got to that point, having taught Krav Maga and martial arts for 20 years, having taught at universities for 20 years, it really wasn't that much of a daunting prospect. Of course, I felt the prickles of nervousness beforehand, but that made me sharp. That made me kind of alive to it. But I didn't find it daunting, right? But take someone else who, you know, is a good martial artist and teaches small groups, and go, all right, now you're going to teach 400, right? Does that mean that they can just as easily do it the first time as they would the 50th time, the 100th time, the 1000th time? I don't think it does. I don't think it kind of tracks across those situations in that way.
Yeah.
So the fast stuff, yeah, I think it's, you know, it's interesting. It gives you something, that kind of exposure to adrenaline gives you a little bit of the mindset, but it won't make the difference, the entire difference, when it comes to the event. Yeah. That's my view about that path. That's my view about it. I think it has a purpose, but I don't think it's the main thing or the only thing.
For sure.
Yeah. And I think it's more tricks in many senses. It's more tricks.
Yeah. And it's, the thing is, you know, going back to sort of, do we get in as many punch-ups as we used to? You know, that does inoculate you to being in a punch-up. You know, most people are far more afraid of being hit in the face than actually the results of being hit in the face, you know, cause some sort of further long-term effect. You know, thinking about it happening is always far worse than actually, once you've been hit, you're all right, okay, this is it, it's going on. But I think now we've got sort of security professionals, sort of ex-military, police, prison officers, you know, in and amongst the sort of the regular club members, and they're all probably, whether they appreciate it or not, they're all very, very sort of, you know, top percentage of people that have been exposed to either live or really, really thorough training on it, which gives them a massive advantage that I think if you're not finding that elsewhere in your life, it's really difficult to sort of find and replicate with value and with sort of with context to violent situations. If you haven't worked on the door a bit, you know, if you haven't done a thing where you've actually either, you know, been in that situation or, you know, sort of had to work through it in, you know, a really professionally trained manner, it's difficult.
Yeah. No, I do agree, and that's where I think the fast stuff or something like it, replication and so on in training, you know, can give a sense of that. I mean, scenarios are really difficult to set up in training because you have to run them so many times for the same individual with different possibilities of outcomes, and the role players have to be, you know, on point with what they say and do and how they react to what's said, so you don't get a kind of a false positive and so on. But that aside, you know. And when I say I come full circle, you know, I think the other path now, you know, it's just back to where I really started, is that actually, yeah, that it's not the mindset in the sense of coping with adrenaline. That's one part of it. How we get to that level of being able to deal with violence is at least in part the kind of training that we engage in on a class basis. You know, every class, you know, is it tough, right? Not just physically, mentally as well, but are you, and again, this is for people that train a long time, are you now a year in more used to getting punched and hit and struck and thrown to the floor and busted up a little where you were a year ago, right? And 2 years, are you more comfortable with that than before? And I think that's a slower journey. The thing about the adrenal stress training is everyone wants it now. I want the mindset now. All right, I'm going to be aggressive. As though aggression somehow kind of overcome. Yeah, loads of people will be aggressive, but aggression itself won't necessarily win the day. You've got to have all the other things with it. You've got to have the resilience. And so I think building resilience over, you know, it's an incremental process, right? And I saw a meme a while ago to do with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and it's like, you know, first day of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and there's like a cute teddy bear with a gi on, like, you know, and it says 10 years of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and there's this kind of massive flea-bitten teddy bear with one ear hanging off, you know, an eye patched over, and, you know, its lip all swollen, and you know, stitches on its head, and it's kind of looking sort of a bit, but it's looking brutal, right? And I think that's the journey, and with that comes two things. One is resilience, right? You're just used to getting hit, you become inured to it, used to getting thrown, you're used to being strangled on the floor, you're used to, and it doesn't phase you that much, right? You just acclimatize to it, your body hardens to it, your mind hardens to it, you get used to I say adversity, but you get used to uncomfortableness, you get used to discomfort. You really ache, your arm doesn't quite straighten, right? You get used to that, you know, and you know, you broke my toe a while ago. All right, well, you're used to it, right? Yeah, so someone said, how long do you take off training? Well, I didn't, right? You know, just like strapped it up and continued. So really, it's like it's just a toe, right? You know, now sure, I've got problems physically from training, but I think, you know, if you're sensible about these things, you get that kind of inurement to discomfort. And the second thing, and this is I think what people miss what they mean by mindset. By mindset, when they talk about it in the combatives community, they mean aggression. You know, overcoming adrenaline and being aggressive. I don't mean that by mindset anymore. I mean the desire to dominate.
Yeah.
That I don't need to be aggressive to dominate someone, right? But the desire to dominate your opponent is what you want out of training, right? You know, whatever they're doing to you, I'm going to do it more until you can't do what you're doing. The desire to dominate someone, you know, it's not a healthy thing in the rest of our life, but in that moment, and that can be achieved through sporting stuff or the application of sporting stuff. We have to be that's why we talk about live stuff all the time, not just kind of techniques, right? But the whole stuff that goes underneath it, the wrestling, the grappling on the floor, the sparring, the punching. There's a competitive aspect. It's practicing in a safe environment, and people get hurt as part of that. And so that really hurt. Oh well, carry on, right? Oh, I think I've hurt my wrist. And at that point, I kind of go, really, it's not broken. It's just a bit sore. It's maybe sprained it, but
and use your elbow.
Carry on, right? Carry on to the end of the session. You'll get used to that, but don't let them dominate you in that way, right? Get back and dominate them, and you can do that with full contact. You can do that with light contact. Whatever level of physicality you want, is that desire to dominate the other person, or that need to dominate the other person, and that can come through kind of competitive elements within stuff. And then and the more skilled you become at things like grappling, stand-up grappling, floor grappling, punching and kicking, the more you're able to dominate someone.
And
then take that to that person that has that set of skill sets and the desire to use them to dominate their opponent, and give them a little bit of street smarts, a little bit of wherewithal about striking first, about weapons, and about that situation that we just looked at. That dude's going to kick off, you can't get away, he carries a knife, or you've seen the knife, you've got to dominate him, right? And and then the stuff about am I in the right mindset? Can I break out of the fear response? Well, if you've done that once, then the desire to dominate will come back.
I think it's the more we do, I think the more we do, and the longer you spend doing it, the longer you spend teaching it, the more you see that's where a lot of people really need to work, really develop. And it's hard. It takes a skilled instructor. It takes time and effort from the sort of trainees. But that's where I think that's where the rewards are real.
And again, it revisits stuff that we've said about. I was reminded of something similar during the week. A guy that was on my original Krav Maga instructor course, Gershon Ben Koran, who's now lives in the US, originally from Scotland, well, from the UK and from Scotland. He writes a blog. He's a great Krav Maga instructor. He writes a blog, and he's kind of picked up on some of the stuff that we obviously pick up on as well. And try and put it in my language rather than his. This kind of emphasis on Krav Maga now, or many systems, self-defense systems, is on the kind of the techniques, the tricks that we call the techniques. So what you need is this kind of stylized technique, and that will get you out of this situation, right? So someone bear hugs you, and if I do this technique, it will, right, like it's Aikido almost, like he does this to me and then I do this to them, and what we need is these techniques, and that's what everyone ever trains. But you need to go beyond that. They're a good starting point, but bear hug is just double underhooks, and people can do lots and lots of different things from double underhooks if they take your balance away. If you're not used to stopping someone from taking your balance away from double underhooks, then all the techniques in the world won't be of use at that point, because you're gonna, someone that knows what they're doing with double underhooks is gonna rip you to the floor, or bounce you off your head, or drive you into the wall. So if you're not practicing the underlying skill set, if you're not doing the fighting training, if you're not doing the phases of combat, right, the not just the preemptive strike, the striking skills and the sparring, the kind of the stand-up grappling, the floor grappling, right? If you're not doing those, then really the techniques aren't gonna work. It's a bit like saying to a boxer, I think I said this before, say to a boxer, what's your favorite technique? It's like, what do you mean? Well, if someone throws a right cross, what's your technique? What do you respond with? Show me your technique. And they might come out with 20 different things, because there's not a kind of a single technique to be used against all right crosses. Their technique against right crosses is, the skill set of covering, bobbing, weaving. They might be able to come up with a kind of pad combo, right, like a pad man, but that's not set in stone, right? You might slip this way, come back with a left hook, but that's going to be instinctive in the moment from dealing with right crosses over and over and over and over again, and fine tuning different kind of shoulder rolls and stuff like that, moving your head, right? But there's no one going, all right, when someone throws a right cross, you're going to make sure a parry, and then you're going to step to the side, you're going to hit all right. Maybe in the first 4 weeks, 6 weeks of boxing, you get that kind of detailed instruction, but after you've got the moves, it's about making them live.
Yeah, inventiveness. Yeah, I think you especially stuff on the ground, releases from things in class, and you see sort of people get stuck or fail, or this is and they sort of they pause at that point.
No, it doesn't work.
No, that's the point, that you need to just start fighting, and the guy putting on the hold needs to start hanging the fuck on and make it awkward. And then that's learning. Yeah, it wasn't the technique at all, but what you did was have a good scrap, and neither of you gave up, and one of you stood up in the end. And it's great when it goes wrong, because it is going to go wrong,
Failed 10 times, great, right? So did you make it work 11th? Did you find a way out?
Yeah. So the failures are fantastic if you've got a good training partner who's not going to let up. That's failed. Right now, I'm going to hang on to your arm. Now I'm going to grab you by the back of the head as you're trying to get up, and you fight your way up, or you don't. You're stuck there, and you have to tap, and then you feel like a melt.
Yeah. But then you go again, and you try again, and oh, but why didn't it work? Well, because you haven't done it enough, right? You haven't seen you haven't worked through the different possibilities. I can't show you 10 million possibilities on the ground like that. It's not BJJ, right? But you can certainly, you could go to BJJ and you'd have way more, right? But we don't have time to do all that, but we also don't need to do all that. But what you can do is spend a lot of that time just sort of working through different problems that they're causing you there, and I'll help you out on some different ideas and so on. But you've got to put the energy and the time into the struggle. Rather than just go, oh, it didn't work for me, because he fucked it up for you, because he did something else when you started to get out, right? Well, why didn't you tell me that? Well, because that would be like, if this, then this, and if this, and that, right? Just go with the principles and, struggle and try and find ways, and I'll help you try and find ways. But yeah. But so I guess that sort of stuff came from how you would get yourself in the right mental place to deal with the kind of the sheer violence of an aggressor like the one that we saw in the video. Someone who is overwhelmingly violent won't stop, right? The kind of the thing that people don't really want to see. They want to put that aside. That people don't sort of exist. What I need is a few tricks to deal with that kind of person. I think the moral of the message is, it takes more than that to deal with that kind of person, and that's what you should be looking at, and that's why we do things the way that we do them, and that's why we do things like hitting first, right? It's I'm just not gonna how could you not in that situation contemplate striking first, and at least trying to give yourself a chance of surviving that kind of situation.
And it does boil down to survival, like you say. I think when you appreciate that, that's the start of the mindset change. It isn't, I haven't got the chance to use this move. It's
and that's what violence is, right? That's what violence looks like. It's not pleasant. It's not entertaining. But sometimes I don't think that message gets through enough. And when we get this, but shouldn't it be more like, I can block and then I can punch, and then I'm in the right because he attacked me first. You're so in the right, and now you're in the ground.
Hopefully not. Good. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, we should probably crack on with some other stuff. Get back to the things that pays the bills and whatnot.
Yeah. But that's it. More pods to come. I think there's a couple of things I've got lined up. So
let's sort the next one soon.
We'll get that on going. But good to talk. Great to see you.
Good. And I had a couple of requests for talking about certain stuff. People emailed through, so maybe next time we'll pick up on a couple of those. I'll send you the questions, and we can address those next time. And so if anyone is listening, hello.
Absolutely.
Do email any kind of stuff that you want us to talk about, and we'll ignore it. No, we will address it if it's decent questions. You can send it to inquiries@kravmaga-nottingham.co.uk. And we'll get round. Thanks to all those who have messaged in or asked me in person at training to cover stuff.
Much appreciated.
All right, good to see you.
Cool. And you catch you
I'll
around.
see you soon.
See you, man.
Cheerio.